So I'd like to introduce the first speaker, and that is Judge Izzat. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Kareem Izzat. I'm a circuit judge appointed 2 years to Wood Green Crown Court. Prior to that, I was a recorder on the Western Circuit and a district judge and deputy district judge, all in crime. I have been through the JAC process 5 occasions and been appointed on 4 of those occasions. I applied prior to this most recent application as a circuit judge and wasn't successful. I have been on the interview panel at the JAC twice in relation to district judge and deputy district judge, so I've got some experience on both sides of the application process. I'm happy in due course to answer any questions that anybody has. I'm not professing to be an expert in relation to the application process, but can give you some of the experience that I have had through the process on both sides. In terms of this application, I suppose you're either looking at applying as circuit judge as a recorder, or you're perhaps from a full-time background judicial post and you're applying as a district judge perhaps, or tribunal judge. Slightly different, I suspect, in terms of the way in which you need to approach the application form in terms of your examples and perhaps your referees. What I would say is the JAC application for circuit judge is a paper-based application up until interview, and therefore your form has to be incredibly strong. I think it's important that you update your form. If you've submitted a form previously and you got to interview but you were unsuccessful, don't assume necessarily that that form is the best that it could be. You may have done other work since then which could be a better example to demonstrate the competencies that JAC are looking for. So take time in relation to your application form. I think the next competition for circuit judge launches on the 18th of July and closes on the 8th of August. So you have a month effectively now to put some time into a form, even if you think your form is good. And it may be useful to have somebody else have a look at your form just to give it a once over as well, to give it some fresh eyes, because otherwise after you've looked at the same thing over and over again, sometimes it's easy to become a little complacent or pleased with your examples, and having somebody else just cast an eye over maybe of assistance. You also need to make sure when you get to interview that you have strong examples which are different from your form. I think it's incredibly important to practice interviews. Many of us haven't been interviewed for long periods of time during our careers, and it is a skill. And it's a skill that you can get rusty at and you can get significantly better at if you put in the practice. So I would suggest that as well. In terms of your referees, it's important that you identify people who are going to put in the time and efforts into your references. Of course, as a recorder, it's going to be the person, at least one of the people, your judicial referee is likely to come from your appraiser. If you're a district judge, certainly from the criminal bench, it's likely to be from the chief magistrate, but you will need also to identify one other who is going to speak on your behalf. So it's important to identify who that can be, approach them in advance, and perhaps give them some examples of the work that you've worked on with them so that they are able to comment on the work that you've done. It's also, I think, probably quite useful if you haven't had a recent appraisal to have an up-to-date appraisal, but there's enough time to try and book that in now, so that if you haven't been appraised for some time and you need up-to-date examples that will assist those who are writing the reference if you've got a recent appraisal behind you. So that's it from me for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions later in this session. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Judge. I'd now like to pass you over to Judge Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was a tour de force of summary, I must say, to follow that. I'm Judge Leona Harrison. I am a family circuit judge. I was appointed last September 2022 after 14 happy years as a recorder. My background is I come from a first generation in terms of going to university, and the whole of this process was utterly alien to me, and I was lucky to have a mentor. So I'm delighted that you have been able to attend today's application seminar, because I think seminars like this hopefully will provide you with very important information. In terms of the application form, I can't stress enough that the temptation is to leave it to the last minute. If you're at the bar and you're used to being briefed and turning a brief round overnight, the temptation is to say you'll get to it and not give it the time. It really does pay great rewards if you spend the time on the application. Be critical in your consideration of what you write. It really does need to hit the competencies. It's not how we necessarily work in our everyday life, but you need to be able to tick each of the competencies, or at least most of them in any one section, and be able to say to yourself, how does the example you give evidence, not just say, but evidence the competency that you're trying to demonstrate? Take advice from others. Don't be fearful of criticism from anyone. If they can assist you, they don't have to be lawyers to be able to assist you when looking at the competencies, but they do need to be able to understand the competency that you are hitting. As said, last time I was interviewed, prior to being made a recorder, was for tenancy in my then chambers some 30 years ago. Before then, as I say, recorder 14 years ago. So you do need to get advice, you do need to get guidance, and it is worth practicing. There is nothing harder than being put on the spot in an interview and asked a question that, if you haven't had time and given yourself an opportunity of practicing one of the answers that you might give, it becomes very difficult under stress. Don't be fearful of asking others for advice. I had a mentor. If you can obtain a mentor either through the process or out with the process, it is really useful. Many people I know have imposter syndrome and believe they can't do it, but you can, but you may need assistance and advice to do so. Remember that for those of you that don't come from traditional backgrounds or unnecessarily followed the bar, you too have transferable skills, and that the skills that you've used, maybe as a school governor, maybe as a trustee of a charity, maybe helping to run the local scout troop, or other voluntary work, you have a range of transferable skills that will demonstrate many of the competencies. They don't just have to be legally based. But of course, when looking at referees, don't be fearful of asking the referees also, what do they remember as being your best cases? Give them two examples that they can use. To write the references is quite an onerous task. Don't feel that you have to ask somebody. Only ask people that you know will be able to spend the time, will identify the examples and be able to demonstrate the competencies on your behalf. I was asked to say a bit of how the job is once you do take the job full time. It has been quite a change. I was a recorder for 14 years and had got used to the flexibility of working part time, and it is very much a full-time job. It's challenging, it's fascinating, it can be relentless, but it is very, very rewarding being able to do this on a daily basis and follow a case through from the start to the end. Don't be fearful of applying outside your own jurisdiction that you work in. As I've indicated already, the skills are very much transferable. If you are able to assimilate facts fast in a case that might be a care case of 3,000 pages, you can similarly do that in respect of any other jurisdiction. If you're able to identify the relevant legal principles and make the appropriate submissions in your usual jurisdiction, why should you not be able to do that in others? So look at the application in the wider sense rather than just looking at your own jurisdiction, because you might find that actually to work within a jurisdiction that is not one that you're used to working within is incredibly rewarding and gives you more options. In terms of applying, I know for some people it can be a barrier when you look at the applications in terms of location. We apply to a circuit, to an area, but we don't know where we are going. And I've spoken to many people in my role as diversity and community relations judge to encourage people to spread their applications. Make the application, and then on the basis you're successful, have that dialogue with the judicial office as to what you can realistically do in terms of where you can take a job and a role. Explain why. In my case, I had a little boy who's neurodiverse, and it wasn't an option for me to move him from his school. So I needed to be able to commute. Be open, be realistic, but don't be put off making the application because you don't already know where you may or may not be appointed to. As already indicated, I didn't get a CJ appointment on my first application, Many judges will tell you that's the case. Do not see that as a failure, see it as a challenge. It means that you need to refine your form, or if you got to interview, you need to develop those skills. But that if you are determined, you will do it, and you will find this as a very rewarding job for those of you who have not done it, or for those of you who have not done it full time. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Judge. I will now be passing you over to Chris Morgan, who's from the JAC, and he's the Selection Exercise Manager. Thank you, Chris. Sorry, Chris, you're on mute.
Yeah, on mute again, sorry. And now my camera's playing up. I have some slides though, which I'll share, so there will at least be something to look at that's just not just my screen glitching. Right, so yes, yeah, hi, I'm Chris Morgan, the Selection Exercise Manager for Circuit Judge at the JAC. I was also the Selection Exercise Manager for the previous Circuit Judge exercise, so I don't know if there's anyone here that applied for that, but you might recognise my name from that. Oh, there we are. Okay, so yeah, first of all, just a little bit of background about the JAC. I'm sure you've all heard of us, but just to go over the basics. We were established by the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005 with the remit to make judicial appointments independent, transparent and fair. In selecting candidates, the JAC has 3 statutory duties: to select solely on merit, to select only people of good character, and to encourage diversity in the range of appointments. I'm struggling to work out which keys on my keyboard actually move the slides on. There we are, I think that's it. Yeah, this slide shows some of the steps that we take in order to ensure open and fair selection. We have a assigned commissioner for every exercise who oversees quality assurance and fair selection. We train our panel members on fair selection and observe them at interview to make sure that they're following through on this. All selection materials are reviewed to ensure their quality and accessibility by an advisory group. We use targeted outreach, and then we monitor the progress of these target groups at each stage of all exercises. We use name blind sifting. We have something called the equal merit provision, which covers situations where 2 or more candidates are judged by the commission to be of equal merit, assessed against the criteria for the vacancy, and there is clear underrepresentation on the basis of either gender or ethnicity in the roles that they're applying for. In this situation, we can give priority to the candidates from underrepresented groups for the purposes of increasing judicial diversity. The equal merit provision can be applied at the shortlisting stage and at the final decision stage. We also use calibration during the SIFT and selection day, and then moderation after them to ensure consistency across our panels, and all our selection processes are independently reviewed and verified to ensure best practice. So here are some specifics about the circuit judge exercise. As has already been said, it opens on the 18th, so that's just over a week away now. There are 52 vacancies for immediate appointment, 40 in crime, 7 in family and 5 in civil. Location was mentioned just now. There will be vacancies across England and Wales, but we don't actually have a breakdown of these locations yet. I'll cover that in a bit more detail later. Just to say as well that we actually published on our website the full vacancy information for this site a couple of hours ago. So I do encourage you to get on our website when you get the chance and have a look at everything. Like all the information that I cover today will be on that, and there's a lot of other useful information as well. So first of all, there is the, there we are. So yeah, first of all, a little bit about eligibility. You need to be a solicitor or barrister qualified in England and Wales with at least 7 years post-qualification experience. The legal criteria is a bit more complex than that. The legislation talks about you could either meet the 7-year requirement, or you can be a recorder, or you could have held a number of full-time appointments for at least 3 years. But in practice, you won't meet any of the other criteria. or it's very unlikely that you'd meet any of the other criteria unless you also had 7 years post-qualification experience. So that's the one to check, really. You also need previous judicial experience sitting as a judge in a salaried or fee-paid capacity or in a similar role, such as the chair of an equivalent body for which a legal qualification is required. And you're required to have 30 sitting days previous judicial experience, excluding training and sick days. You also need to be able to provide a reasonable length of service. This is defined as being able to serve for 5 years from appointment until the statutory retirement age of 75. Right, so there's quite a bit on this slide, and I'll talk through each box in turn. This is basically an overview of the process from start to finish. So, as I said, we're launching on the 18th, and it's open until the 8th of August. This is 3 weeks, which is longer than our usual 2 weeks. We've allowed an extra week because it's during the summer holidays, and I know that's inconvenient for some people. Some information about what you'll need to put on your application form. You need to complete a self-assessment form which covers the 5 competencies, which I'll talk a bit about later. These are to demonstrate that you have the knowledge and experience for the role. The self-assessment must be no more than 250 words per competency. You will also be asked to rank the jurisdictions that you wish to apply for. You should only place a number against the jurisdictions that you do wish to apply for, and you should leave the others blank. On the self-assessment form, you will also need to do a 250-word statement of suitability for each jurisdiction that you're applying for. This, as touched on before, this isn't necessarily just direct experience in that jurisdiction. This can be transferable skills as well. And there's details on the vacancy information on the website about the transferable skills that we're looking for each jurisdiction. You'll also have to provide your career history and a statement about how you meet the 30 days previous judicial experience requirement. Again, as mentioned before, you will need to provide 2 independent assessors who are basically references. If you hold a salaried judicial role, you will need to provide 2 judicial assessors. If you hold a fee-paid role and still practice as well, we'll need 1 judicial assessor and 1 professional assessor reflecting your practice. Again, there's full information about this, including who to nominate as your judicial or professional assessors on the website in the vacancy information. I will add, though, that when it comes to the independent assessors, it's what they know about you, not who they are. We don't give it a more heavy weighting if it's from a senior judge. We just want to know that they can provide evidence and like recent evidence with examples about how you meet the competencies. It's worth noting that the independent assessments will be requested on the 29th of August, and they'll have until the 19th of September to reply. Again, we've put this up from 3 weeks to 3 weeks from the usual 2 to allow for holidays. But late independent assessments may not be considered in the SIFT, so we're strongly advising that you speak to your independent assessors before you apply and let them know about the dates that they'll be required to respond in. Boxes 3 to 5 cover the shortlisting process. The first stage of the process is a name-blind SIFT, which takes into account the information on your application form and in your independent assessments. The SIFT panel will assess these against the competency framework. Candidates who pass this first stage of the SIFT will then have their applications checked to see that they meet the eligibility requirements, including the 30 sitting days previous judicial experience requirement. And at this stage as well, we'll also look at your statements of suitability and other parts of your application to assess whether you're suitable for each of the jurisdictions that you've applied for. You can be shortlisted for more than 1 jurisdiction. However, the number of candidates invited to selection day for each jurisdiction reflects the number of vacancies in that jurisdiction. So it could be that you're not shortlisted for some jurisdictions, irrespective of your preferences, due to the strength of the field and the number of vacancies. Shortlisting outcomes will be provided to candidates in December. If you're invited to selection day, you'll be asked to return to your application and provide some additional information. This will be confirmation that you consent to us undertaking background checks. We'll also at this stage ask you about your location preferences, and if your location preferences include posts in Wales, you'll be asked for information about your Welsh language skills. Welsh language skills are desirable but not essential, and so they will not be tested at selection day. Once you've returned all this information, you'll be invited to selection day. And just to touch on location a bit, so we don't have much information about location at the moment, but what we're aiming to do is at the point where you're told that you've been shortlisted, we're hoping to provide a breakdown of locations for the role, and we're going to try and provide this in what we're calling clusters. So this will be smaller areas than the circuit, some of which can be quite big. And the idea is that it gives you a kind of an idea to better reflect where you can and can't take up a post. And what we're expected to do is ask people to give a top 3 preference for the clusters, and then list any other clusters that they would still also be willing to be deployed in. As I say, we don't have much location information at the moment, but we do think it's likely that a high number of the crime vacancies will be in London and the South East. Moving on to the selection days themselves, these will be face-to-face in London, and they'll be held between the 12th of February and the 1st of March. The interviews consist of situational questions and then a competency-based interview. Both elements will test all the competencies, and the situational questions will reflect the jurisdiction that you've applied for. If you're invited to selection day for more than one jurisdiction, you'll have one interview that consists of the situational questions for your highest preference jurisdiction, directly followed by your competency-based interview. You'll then be given a separate slot on the same day to take the situational questions for the other jurisdictions that you've applied for. If you're considered suitable for appointment in more than one jurisdiction, you will only be recommended to one jurisdiction, and we will, as far as possible, pay regard to your preferences at this stage, but this needs to be balanced against business need and against our statutory duty to select solely on merit. The JAC doesn't consider your location preferences at all as part of the selection process. Deployment is the responsibility of the senior presiding judge, although the senior presiding judge will take into account your preferences, and they will basically use the order of merit from selection day to give the most meritorious candidates first priority in their preferred location. Okay, and then I'll touch a little bit on the final stages of the process as well. Once we've undertaken all the interviews and marked everyone, we do background checks, which is the character section. I won't go into this too much, but there's sort of full details about how this works and what you need to declare on our website. And then once we've done that, the JSC commissioners sit as the selection and character committee, and they make a final decision on candidates based on their performance at selection day and on the outcomes of the character checks. And then they make recommendations to the appropriate authority, who is the Lord Chief Justice for the circuit judge exercises. And then once we've had confirmation of our recommendations from the Lord Chief Justice, we send out the final recommendations, and this will be by the end of June 2024. This slide has a bit of advice on preparation. I appreciate that we're quite close to the exercise opening now, so I'll just focus on the last couple of points, which is utilise the JSC website for one. There's so much stuff on our website. There's pages of guidance and information on every step of the selection process. You'll find some of the more relevant links are linked from the vacancy information, but do have a look around at the whole website, because there's a lot of very useful stuff on there. And the other thing I'll say is, and this has been touched on by others, is read the competency framework in detail to fully understand what the SIFT and the selection panel are looking for. You need to invest time in thinking of examples that address these criteria. And just to touch on that, touch on this a little more, these are the 5 competencies that we assess on in all our exercises. I won't go into too much detail on each of those. You can read about them in the competency framework, which again is listed from the vacancy page on our website. What I will say though about the competencies is, as I said before, read them, make sure examples match. Recent examples are often better, but I wouldn't adhere too much to this. The idea that they must be within the last 2 years. You should pick the best examples that are most relevant to the competencies and most show off your skills and abilities in meeting the competencies. There's a model for that is applied to a lot of sort of public sector advertising, which is called SOAR, or sometimes it's called STAR. So it's situation, objective, action, result, or sometimes situation, task, action, result. It's a very good model to follow when writing your competencies. But what I will say though is that the word count is very tight for these exercises. 250 words really isn't very much at all. So it's a good idea to basically, you don't want to spend too much time on situation. You don't want to overly explain the situation. You should be focusing on the action and the results, because what the panel want to know is what you did, how you did it, and why. And then, so with regard to the results, do make sure, like as it says there, quantify your success. You should finish by clearly explaining the impact of what you did, because that's, you know, it's important to understand like how what you did was successful. And then I'll just here's a few more useful resources. Again, this is all things that you can find information out about on our website. These slides will be circulated, so you can click on all of these links when you see the slides. Also, I would strongly encourage everyone who hasn't done so already to sign up to the Judicial Appointment Commission's Judging Your Future newsletter, because that's monthly and it will tell you about all the exercises that we've got coming up. And also, I'll pop the link, this last link in the chat at the end when I'm not sharing my screen anymore. But the EEP URL link at the end is for notifications specific to this vacancy. So if you sign up to that, it'll tell you when the exercise launches. It'll give you a reminder to submit your application, and we'll be sending out other sort of relevant information through that as well. So I strongly encourage you to sign up for that. And then just finally, I'd like to talk a bit about our targeted outreach programme. It's a pilot scheme that was established in 2020 to respond to the need to improve judicial diversity, and has been designed to complement existing diversity initiatives currently available to candidates. The targeted outreach and research team engages with and provides advice and guidance to potential candidates from underrepresented backgrounds for certain court and tribunal roles. The programme is aimed at improving outcomes for JAC's target groups, which are ethnic minority, women, disabled, and solicitor candidates. We want to try and help candidates overcome some of the barriers to judicial appointments that are known to exist for these groups, and candidates will benefit from tailored advice, guidance, and access to wider support. Eligible candidates are encouraged to self-refer using the candidate application form on our website. And that's it for me. So I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. And
thank you. We will now be taking questions from you for the panel. As previously explained, if you have a question, can you please type it in the chat bar and I'll read them out individually. If your question is very specific, and I note that there is one person that has sent quite a few questions, which I have offered to respond back offline, just because there's a lot of questions and there are quite a few questions to go through. So I'm just going to work in the order from the last question. So the section of the application form which deals with career history does not carry over from previous applications. This is very annoying because it is far the most lengthy part of the application, about 20 pages in A4 in my case. The JAC has previously promised to carry this information over. Why has this still not happened?
Have to admit, I'm not an expert on how our website works in the background, but I thought that that if you type your career history into your character profile, it did save it to different applications. But say I'm not massively familiar with the candidate side, I'm afraid. I can I'll take that. I will ask our digital team about that and see if I can find out if there is a way of doing that.
Certainly, it was my experience it carried on, because obviously it wasn't my first application. I was successful last year and I didn't have to keep retyping everything in. So
yeah, I think my advice would be just to say, I think there's a candidate profile section that's not specific to an exercise. Try putting your information into that section, and then I think it would carry over. But I say I can look into that.
Okay, thank you. So you can come back to me with that. Similarly, there is tension between being encouraged to apply outside your jurisdiction, but needing to squeeze through a statement of suitability for the jurisdiction applied for.
Right,
Yes.
well, can I help with that? I applied for crime and family, having not done crime since almost pupillage, but I had a lovely mentor who was a criminal judge who was very able to explain to me and help me demonstrate transferable skills. So it wasn't just using an example that was a criminal case, but using an example that showed skills that would be as relevant in a family case as it would be in a criminal case, would be relevant if I was a tribunal judge. It's harder, I accept, because you're really having to strain to ensure you're fulfilling the competences. But it is possible because I was interviewed for crime. So it just takes a lot more effort, but it can bring with it rewards.
Can I just also come in on that in terms of that? Undoubtedly, the skills are transferable. I think you are at a disadvantage in terms of your interview if you're applying for a field that you haven't practiced in. Certainly, as if coming for applying for crime, the circuit judge interviewed for crime, if you didn't come from a criminal background, I think you're at a sizable advantage if you do come from a criminal background. That's not to say that you're not going to get the post if you don't, but given what you're going to be asked and what the decisions that you have to make in the amount of time that you have, having that background knowledge, I think, is of assistance.
Yeah, I think I'd very much agree with that. So sort of taking this in two stages at the moment. Yeah, firstly, the original question was about the statements of suitability, which are looked at the SIFT. My memory from last year is that there weren't like hardly anyone who got through the first stage of the SIFT. So it's already has passed based on the competencies. I don't think hardly anyone was then knocked out on suitability for the jurisdiction. Like if you got through the SIFT, generally you got through the suitability statements as well. Obviously, if you have direct experience in it, you very quickly get through the statement of suitability. But there are, we are looking for transferable skills as well, and the transferable skills that we're looking for are all outlined on the vacancy information. So I would say that if you're interested in the jurisdiction, look at the transferable skills criteria in the jurisdictional information document, and if you match that, you will likely go through the SIFT on suitability. And part of the reason that you likely will go through is that the panel will probably take the view this person potentially could do the job. Let's put them through to interview and see how they do in the situational questions. And I think you're right to say that the situational questions are obviously much more difficult if it's something that you're not used to. Like the crime ones, particularly last year, were quite a taxing sentencing exercise. But you will be given all the sort of the necessary background reading 1 week before before your interview. So we're not setting these tests knowing that people without the experience are going to fail them. We set them and we give everyone the relevant sort of background to it. So you should be, while obviously it's easier if you're more used to the area of law, you should be able to get through the process based on your transferable skills.
And I would also say that even in the situational questioning, it's not about getting 100%. I can remember walking out of my interview, and I had been a family practitioner of 28 years, thinking, oh, I didn't say X, Y, and Z. There were lots of things I felt I had missed out. So either I was very lucky, or it's about how you're dealing with it under pressure. Because the reality is you will ensure that you've covered what you need to cover in the real world doing the job. So it's not about being able to give the perfect answer.
Absolutely.
Thank you. There's a question about the vacancies, that the 52 vacancies doesn't mean that the top 52 candidates are selected. It depends on fulfilling the criteria, even if that means some posts remain unfilled.
So what we started doing last year and what we're doing again this year is it's basically 3 simultaneous recruitment exercises for each of the jurisdictions. So we don't just take the top 52 and then hope they fit the jurisdictions. We will take the top 40 who've applied for crime, the top 7 who've applied for family, and the top 5 who've applied for civil. We'll go through. So I think that's what that post is, what that question is getting at, but yeah, I think that's what that post is, what that question is asking. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to add there.
Okay, my apologies. The previous question was part of a two-part questions, and I'm just reading it in the most recent order. So the first part of the question was that it's difficult to balance SOAR when challenged to give complex and sensitive examples. How do you convey that without using more words on the background to the situation? That was the first part of the question.
I'll put that one over to the judges who will have more experience with this than me.
It's difficult. It really is a case of writing your paragraph and rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it, and then showing it to somebody who has some good skills to say, do you get what I'm trying to say? How few words can I spend on the situation, and how many words can I spend on the demonstrating how I dealt with the problem? It's really difficult.
No, I'd endorse that. I mean, when I was doing mine, I'd write them out. They'd always be way over 250 words, but I'd get down what I wanted, and then I'd go through an exercise of revision and revision and revision, stripping out as many words. How can I rephrase the paragraph or a sentence to try and get it as tight as I possibly could? But as your background information, not hugely relevant. How good was I? What did I do? What did I achieve? What was the end result? And that's where the focus needs to be. And too much background, case names of I did this fancy case or that fancy case, it's just not relevant. It doesn't demonstrate the competency. What did you do? Stripping everything else back. And I know that the examples are meant to be complex, but it's what you were doing. And sometimes people think mystified by it. It's got to be so complex, and if it's not that, well, actually, often I think you're asked to give an example. Certainly in an interview, I've asked and been asked, give us an example of a busy day, and that doesn't necessarily to be complex. It's about your ability to juggle multiple things, and so you can give that in an example without getting too worried about the complexity of the thing.
Thank you for that. There's another follow-on question relating to the 52 vacancies. Chris, I don't know if you want to take that offline and get back to me.
Oh no, right, I've got it now. No, absolutely. We don't just take the top 52. There is a standard, that you have to be deemed selectable, and then we will put through. Yeah, if only 45 people are selectable, then only 45 people will be recommended. We don't just take the top however many.
Okay, thank you.
Just trying to see what else is in that thread. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to. Okay, I think someone else has commented on that thread. So if there is still a little bit of ambiguity about the vacancies, I'm happy to forward that question to Chris offline. Okay. If you are not currently in practice and only sit in different fee-paid judicial roles, is it an advantage or disadvantage? And in relation to references, would you need a reference from each of your roles? Or would you need to get a reference from each of your roles, or could you get, for example, 2 referees for one jurisdiction?
If you're fee paid and you're still practicing, then one of your referees needs to be someone from who can speak about your practice, as a barrister or solicitor. With regard to the other one, the judicial one, I think you would only need one referee to cover that, and I think your best bet is to pick the one that you think knows the most about your work, because the independent assessors are giving evidence to us against the 5 competencies in the same way as you are on the self-assessment form. So I think you've got to sort of have the same considerations as when you pick your examples. You need to pick the assessor that knows you best and can provide the best evidence about you and about how you meet the competencies.
But you can help them do that. So if you have paperwork that you have put before them for whatever reason that you think's of the quality that will help remind them both of what you did and the skills you're demonstrating, you can help remind your referees. They will be very grateful for anything that helps them complete the form to the best of the ability that they can to help you.
Thank you. There's a question about the format of your application. Sorry, it's disappeared from my screen. It's about whether you can take it in abbreviated note form, or does it have to be sort of in long sentences?
I've seen people do bullet points for the competency, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, it has to be legible. You can't cut out so much sort of grammar and things that we can't work out what you're saying. But yeah, a list of bullet points, for example, is absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. And so you mentioned transferable skills if you're applying for a new jurisdiction. How does that fit into a scenario question at interview?
So I think I touched on this a bit before. We do scenario questions, and obviously you probably are. We try and design it so that people without direct experience of the jurisdiction can still sort of demonstrate the skills and abilities. But obviously, if you're familiar with the area of law, you are going to be at an advantage. I don't think there's much we can do about that. But as I say, with the situational questions, you'll get a whole load of background reading 1 week before your interview, and it'll point you to the areas of law that you're going to be asked about. So I do think it is, like, it's obviously possible. I've seen it happen a number of times. It is perfectly possible to get through a situational questions at interview without having experience of the jurisdiction.
It is perfectly possible. One of my new district judges is her previous, she was a Crown prosecution solicitor, and she's now a family district judge. I'm not saying that it isn't hard, but it's absolutely possible.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions in the chat bar about the PowerPoint presentation. They have been sent in advance. However, if anyone has registered late after noon today, I will send them on to you.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to pop. Yeah, here, I'll just the link I'm just posting into the chat is the link for the vacancy specific alerts. So if you sign up to that, you'll be reminded when the exercise opens. I think you get a message like a day or two before it closes as well, and on the day that it closes, reminding you to submit your application. And if there's any sort of updates to the vacancy information, we'll post those onto that as well. So I encourage anyone who's interested to click on that link and put their details in.
Okay, I can see a couple of questions about vacancy, so I hope that will help. There is one about asking about an application round next year, if there's likely to be one, and whether there is any information about how many family jobs that are likely to be made available.
For the last few years, we've done circuit judge every year. We haven't had any specific discussions about whether there will be one next year or not, but there's been one. Certainly the last 3 years, there's been one every year. And I believe for quite a bit longer than that, they've been pretty regular. But no, with regard to the number of vacancies, we won't know. I mean, we won't know probably until just before we launch it, because the number of vacancies in a given year depend on how successful the previous application round has been. And that's kind of, I don't know this, but reading between the lines, I think that's why we can't give you location information at the moment, is because we're still deploying the people that were selected last year. So we know how many more people we need, but there are a few people sort of in a queue waiting to be appointed. So you can look at the number of vacancies at the moment. You can say, well, we've got 50 people or however many in a queue waiting to be filled. So we know we need another 52 in this case. But we can't give you location information because we don't know exactly what locations the people who were successful last year will be going to. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I wouldn't wait making an application on the basis that there'll be another competition next year. There probably will be, and there'll be one the year after that. But given the competition and the people you're going to be competing against, my view would be make the application. The worst that will happen is you won't get the appointment. You'll get some feedback in relation to your interview if you get to the stage of interview, and you can build on that for next year's round of application. So I wouldn't wait ever. So yeah, I would just crack on.
Yeah,
I would second that. Often we need the practice. Speaking for myself, having not gone for an interview process, not gone for an application process until I became a recorder, and then again for circuit judge, it may not be great for those that have to do all the sifting that they have so many, but we need the practice, and more people, the more practice you get, the better you get at it. And you are against your peers in any given year, so you can't necessarily guarantee that another year you will or you won't. I think the problem is particularly those with imposter syndrome feel if they get the first knockback, they don't feel able to do it again. And you have to look at it quite differently. You have to look at it as everyone being a different hurdle till you cross the finishing line.
Yeah, absolutely. I say, yeah, practice, I think is a very good reason to apply this year. Also, if you go out at the SIFT or if you go out after selection days, you will get a tailored feedback letter, and it's a decent amount of feedback. There'll be a good like paragraph or two on each competency. It'll say your answer for this competency, this was good, this wasn't so good. And it will go through each of the competencies that you've submitted answers for and give you feedback on them individually. So it's absolutely worth, say, putting in an application. Even if you don't get through the SIFT, you will be told why you didn't get through the SIFT, and this will give you a better chance the following year. I see there's a question about the crime vacancies. 40 actually isn't massively high. I think basically, so I did this exercise last year, and it was 55 out of 80 were crime vacancies, and I believe the year before that about 2/3 of the vacancies were crime as well. So I think recent experience has been that it's usual for the majority of the vacancies to be in crime.
Okay, thank you. How long have you got to accept a post? 6 months and then you have to start again, or is it a year?
I actually don't know that. As I say, we make the recommendations to Judicial Office and they go away and do the deployment, so I don't know that.
I think you have to take up post within 6 months of accepting the job. So you'll get a letter from the JAC saying that you've been you're appointable. I think that you get a letter from the Judicial Office offering you the job. Then you have a deployment meeting to determine where you would be deployed to. And following that meeting, you then have, I think it's either 14 days or 28 days to then accept that post or otherwise. And then following that date, you've got to take up post within 6 months. So that, I think, broadly speaking, is the timescale.
And there's various training to do, isn't there, before you take up the post as well, I believe.
It depends on your background. So if you've not got a criminal background and you get a criminal posting, then I think you do the record a crime course before you could sit in as a circuit judge doing crime. I don't know in different jurisdictions, but certainly in crime, if you've not got a criminal background, you have to do the course.
And you also have to do some sitting in if that isn't your background. So you actually spend some time with a judge in whose jurisdiction you are now going to be sitting full time. Certainly my experience was that they were very accommodating of cases that I felt a personal commitment to, but professionally I didn't want to not finish.
Thank you. I know you've touched on the assessors, but there is a question to say the judges seem to differ in their view on whether a background in a different jurisdiction or from a tribunal background is possible. What is the JAC's view on this?
Yeah, it's I think I covered this before. It is you're encouraged to apply for the jurisdictions that you're interested in. It's perfectly possible to get through without specific experience of that jurisdiction.
Can I ask, Chris, do you keep stats on those who apply for a jurisdiction which isn't there from their background?
No, actually, I don't think we do.
Right.
It's not something that I recorded during the exercise last time. We do we look at the stats about sort of the social mobility and the ethnic minorities, disabilities, women, solicitor candidates, but I think it would be quite difficult to go back and get that information about people applying from different jurisdictions. But as I say, when we looked at the statements of suitability last time round, we were putting if you applied for it and your application was good enough to get you through the first part of the SIFT, then it was probably good enough to get you through the suitability requirement as well. And then there's the question about how easy or difficult are the situational questions, but that's a slightly different issue.
Okay,
Just-
sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, just dealing head on with the stats, I've seen the question that asks why only 1.1% of judges black as one of the new recent black appointments. I agree the figure is too low. There is now a raft of hopefully new appointments that are going to try and make a difference, either through being diversity and community relation judges or in other areas, mentoring, helping people. The figure is too low. But there needs to be a concerted effort in all areas to improve it so that we have a judiciary that properly reflects the community we serve.
Yeah, and I would refer to the targeted outreach scheme as well that we're conducting at the moment.
Thank you. When will a successful applicant be finally informed? How long after the final recommendation stage of the 24th of June?
So end of June, we will tell you that whether you've been recommended or not. And as I say, I think after that, you're in the hands of the judicial office, and we covered that a bit just now.
It can take ages.
Yeah, I
It
was
can
going to
take
say it nicer than
ages.
that, but yes, absolutely.
And you're holding the secret because you have to keep it a secret for a long time. But it's one of those few lovely secrets that you get to keep. So make the most of it, because once you're in the role full time, it is full on.
Did you start sitting in the autumn recess after you were appointed? Was it that sort of time frame?
So I may have got the dates wrong. I think I was notified about the April and started sitting at the end of notionally end of August, actually 1st of September. I think it was about 5 months.
Likewise.
Is it 30-day sitting requirement by appointment or application, please?
It's actually somewhere in the middle. We will we look at eligibility after the SIFT. So we have the selection and character committee will meet at I believe it's the very end of November we're due to meet, and you're expected to have met the 30 sitting days requirement by that date. So it's a bit later than application, but a bit earlier than appointment. And this is covered on the website, but if you haven't met the 30 days by the time you apply, then there's a section underneath. There's a bit where you put the number of days you've done in, and there's a section underneath that basically asks you to give details, and in that you should just clearly state I will meet 30 days by, and then give the date. I see there's a question as well about the one judicial and one professional assessor. So let me scroll up. I think this was about if you're fee paid but you don't practice anymore, what should you do? I think actually in that situation, you probably are, even though you're fee paid, you probably are better off just providing two judicial assessors, because if you haven't practiced professionally for a number of years, that information is going to be out of date, and the most important thing is that we get up-to-date relevant information with good evidence. I will say you probably will get an email from us saying, shouldn't you have nominated, because we'll look at what you enter and we'll see that you're fee paid. You probably will get an email from us saying, have you nominated the right assessors? But just email us back and say, yeah, I don't practice anymore, so I nominated two judicial, and that will be absolutely fine.
Okay, there's one about statement of suitability, and maybe I could pass this one over to the judges. How should I approach drafting this? What do I need to include and should include to make specific reference to the competencies? Do I need to include more examples or just more of a general statement?
I mean, for me, I used it as an opportunity to sell myself outside of the 250 word limit for the competencies, because I was applying for a criminal post and I had a criminal background. I could do that in quite short word usage, and thereafter spent lots of time trying to put forward all the things that I had done during my career, which I couldn't get within the competencies. So it wasn't competency linked, but I used it as an opportunity to sell the best me that I could.
Yes, I would second that. I used it as an opportunity. If I felt that there were any of the competencies I didn't quite have enough in them, that and how I perceived it, I used it as that opportunity for the extra words, but also to give an idea of some breadth, because obviously the competencies are very focused, but the statement of suitability gave me an opportunity to say a bit about me as a person doing other things.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. we don't just read the 250 words to decide if you're suitable, you know, like if it's apparent, if you've got hundreds of days experience as a recorder in the same jurisdiction, you're going to go straight through on suitability. Also, we can see your career history. You don't need to just spend the whole 250 words listing all the roles you've done that relate to that jurisdiction, but it is a good opportunity to sort of tie all that information together in a brief summary. And to say, if you don't have the direct experience, then maybe do treat it a bit more like a competency-based question, because you will have in the jurisdictional information, you will have the sort of transferable skills we're looking for. So maybe in that situation, you do need to sort of, you know, evidence it a bit more. But yeah, as I say, I think that there's a number of approaches you can take, and as long as you can demonstrate the criteria, the transferable skills that we're looking for, you should be all right. And as I say, we don't just look at that one statement to determine suitability, we look at the whole application.
Okay, thank you for that. I do note that we do have a lot of questions in the chat bar, and I do apologise we haven't had time to answer all of them. And also to those that haven't received the slideshow presentation, if you do feel that the information isn't on there or on the JAC website and you consider your question is still unanswered, then please do email me and I'll make sure that your question is answered. So I'd like to thank you all for dialing in this evening, and a special thank you to the judges and the JAC for your time. Hope you have found this seminar interesting and informative, and it will help you with your application. So I'd just like to wish you all good luck and thank you all. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much
Thanks,
indeed.
everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.
Good luck in your applications.
Yeah.